Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Korra fan commentary track video. This one's going to be for Book 4 Balance Episode 6, Battle of Zaofu. If you have other episodes you wanted me to do commentary tracks for from Avatar and Korra, definitely let me know in the comment section below. But to sync up your copy of the episode with this track, have your copy of the episode, whether that be DVD, Blu-ray or online stream, ready to go at the start of this episode, including the introduction. Then I'll stop this introduction to the video. There'll be about a 10 seconds of pause with no audio, and when I start talking again after that pause, that's when I'll hit play, that's when you should hit play, and we should be synced up. So, bringing the introduction of the video to a close, you hit play when you hear me speak again after this pause. Okay, so here we are with K406, Battle of Zaofu. I have this rated in or around, I think it's the 40 or 41 spot on my list, so I don't rate this episode particularly highly. I think it's unfortunate, but there is this section of Book 4 that has some of its weaker episodes all in a row. For me, episode 5, 6, 7, and 8 all in a row are unfortunately some of the weakest within the book. It's not that everything's weak, there's still good moments. It's just obviously Remembrances not great. Reunion is actually relatively weak despite being the reunion episode. And then this one, I think it's just an episode that feels frustrating in many ways. It highlights sort of the confusion of where Korra is in her arc. I maintain that it works, and I think some people over-exaggerate like the meaning of this episode in that, especially now that Avatar is back on Netflix, and people are talking about Korra in a more disparaging light once again. You're seeing the same talking points come out again of just like, Korra couldn't even be Kuvira in the Avatar state, completely ignoring the nuance of it being in the middle of her recovery arc. But, and while I disagree with that, because of course this is the idea of like, yes, she is still recovering. It's not until episode 9 that she fully recovers. I can understand it to a certain degree, because the one weakness of Korra's recovery arc, despite how good of an arc it is in general, is that it does get a little bit confusing, the fact that it is this kind of multi-stage thing, and she's kind of recovered to a certain degree, but she hasn't recovered fully, and that sort of thing. But anyway, let's get into this one. So, the other thing here is this, is like, Sue is moving in here with Wei and Wing to kill Kuvira. She is bringing her sons with her to assassinate their sister, basically. Her daughter. And this is the one where it feels like the most heavily like, did you at all plan out like the dynamic between Kuvira and Sue? Because it feels like there was a lot of saving in a way, I think, to be done on this dynamic in the comic Runes of the Empire, of restoring the actual connection. I get that you are meant to view, of course, Sue's unwillingness to take control of the Earth Kingdom and stabilize as being this kind of point of, again, the thing with Kuvira is abandonment. So Sue has abandoned the Earth Kingdom, so I'm going to step in, and all of a sudden Kuvira now has an issue with Sue. It feels like you don't see in the series like any of that motherly connection, any of that mother-daughter relationship. And I think it's so unfortunate, because there was so much potential. Like I said, in the middle of this, and like episode 5, 6, 7, and 8, like arc of episodes, I think this was maybe your opportunity to really do something along those lines of like, do a little bit of a flashback arc and show what Kuvira used to be. The other point is obviously like that Opal is very, you know, kind of impassioned in a way this season about how much issues she has with what Kuvira did. And you still in a way don't really know, like, is it informed because she was ultimately close to Kuvira or not? And like this is interesting to see like Korra in the right here of just like, no, they are the ones who did something wrong here. We have to calm things down here. Opal, you understand why she wants to do this and is getting emotionally invested in all of this, but as an airbender, you know, non-aggression, they're not meant to do that. I like kind of Jinora kind of being the leader of her siblings. And that this does mark that sort of shift of like, Jinora is kind of more part of the group now. I wish they focused on her a little bit more in this book, you know, after of course getting the tattoos. It's a little bit unfortunate, just that. It's why like book 4 has never been my favorite book of Korra, and I've always tended to lean towards preferring the earlier books of Korra, because it felt like they were written a little bit like more consistently stronger. There's still the good moments throughout. It's just I think book 1 and 2 are more consistently per episode. The theme consistency per episode, it's much better, I think. So yeah, this episode's a pretty kind of straightforward one in terms of its plotting. There's just the kind of Korra Kuvira plot, and then there is the train plot here with Bataar Jr., Bolin, Varrick, and so on. Re-education camp. And this is an interesting one because you see this different side of Varrick here. Like this is one thing book 2 does quite well, is finally getting into some, I think, serious development with Varrick, and also more importantly, I suppose, Zhu Li really steps out of the kind of shadows in a way as a character and becomes more than just a little bit of a comedy sidekick to Varrick and becomes a character of her own. And so her betrayal, the effect that has on Varrick, and then their reunion later on, it's a pretty strong arc. Like you see in this episode how impacted Varrick is by the fact that he thinks still that she has betrayed him. But here we go, confrontation. And this is a big moment. This is kind of like your mid-season finale. That's the point at which we're at. And the strength of this is like Kuvira plays all this really, really well. She has the army right there, but doesn't actually like act against Zaofu, and basically waits for them to make the mistake and just counters. And so she looks good in all of this and is doing things right, and it makes Sue and the others look like they're the ones at fault. And it keeps her loyalty up amongst her soldiers of she's being kind of more honorable than they are in a way. Kind of a little bit of a low blow there of like mentioning Bolin in that way to her. And like this is her logical point, but I think deep down you do very much get the sense that this is just there to get one back at Sue in a way. And so yeah, she basically forces Korra into combat against her. And then what a great move as the leader. I won't ask you to fight the Avatar, I'll do it myself. You can see why they're all so loyal to her. And it's interesting because like Kuvira like knows that Korra's just sort of come back after like recovering from a long-term sort of injury, illness, whatever. I suppose we don't know the full public story, how many different people know, but she can't like know for sure that she's going to win this fight. She maybe has a sense as just like a long-time bender of like she can sense like something's off about Korra. But she has to be wary about, like, if Korra does properly go into the Avatar state, that she can't predict what happens is going to happen. So, like, the question was obviously going to be, like, was she planning to basically, like, the second she goes into the Avatar state, like I've won almost. Is that kind of Kuvira's viewpoint of that will force kind of my army to come in, and it'll be Korra versus an entire army, and is she going to wipe out a whole army just to protect this place? And if she gets the victory, good. Choreography in this fight it's fairly standard. Like, it's obviously meant to be Korra still, you know, a step kind of out of line in a way. She's not fully there yet. And you're meant to be sort of questioning yourself of like, what's holding her back this time? And I think the thing in all of this is that, like, they take a very simplistic style with it of just Korra swings hard, Kuvira dodges, subtle counterattack over and over again. And again, there's nothing too crazy going on here. It's standard punches and kicks, and it's more about the subtlety of Kuvira's fighting style than anything. I think they could have made this a little bit more interesting of like Korra is showing like more technique in what she's doing now, but there's parts of the fight there that are a little bit more even, and it's not just that she's completely on the back foot. That's why I find this frustrating. I don't mind that Korra loses because I think it makes sense that she loses, because if she won this fight, then there's no plot, because she can beat Kuvira. The villain isn't a threat to her anymore. So like Korra has to lose this initial encounter. So here's this interesting point that we get here. Like the Batard Jr. plot of like him feeling that he's always in his father's shadow, and that he doesn't stand out as much compared to the sort of brilliant genius of Varrick is interesting. He eventually goes on to make sort of like the Colossus and so on. But it's this idea that it takes Varrick to harness the power of the spirit vines correctly, and then he takes that and goes where he goes with it. He ends up creating some sort of like almost like a genius invention, but you know, like he says here, you are not a genius, just highlighting that to him. You're solid as like a scientist and inventor, but you're not the creator, basically. Whereas the idea is that Sue, her leadership, with Batard Senior as being like the engineer, the genius engineer, that's where the core of like Zaofu as a place comes from. That was a nice move, that block of the metal bending there. But again, it's just a little bit like, I get Korra's style is a bit more blunt than some of the other avatars, but they overly emphasize it just being sort of punch kick here. And you get it, like they're not going all out here with like the animation just yet, because this isn't the end fight. It is interesting to see a sort of more protracted one-on-one fight where it's perhaps not going like as bombastic and there's not as much movement. They're just sort of standing across from each other fighting. But it could be better, I think. This fight is more interesting for the sort of character stuff that's going on here. Of like, it is Korra trying to prove to herself that she's back, and she's getting better and better in a way, like as it goes on. But Kuvira is a step ahead of her at this point, because she's been doing this the whole time, while she's been the great uniter and like becoming better and better, whereas Korra is still on the comeback. Like you can see these plots happening in the kind of background, but it's not told as much as I think through the fight as well as it perhaps could be. And so, oh, I have a plan, kind of. And yeah, right in front of Batard, he's made a bomb. And I like the humor that comes up here of the idea of like, he started out doing one thing but then turned it into another, and he's like, there's two ways to detonate it. And like this is an interesting thing with Varric of like he brings Bolin on the plan kind of, but there's also that slight sense of like he is willing to go down here because he's so upset about what happened with Zhu Li. And if not for Bolin kind of really stepping up here and kind of saving them both, like he really gets them out of that, because you can see Varric is kind of like, well done Bolin, you saved us at the end. Super tense moment. Why both? And then, yeah, classic Varric explanation. True genius. And again, he did this all at the same time as being watched by Baatar. And again, it's one of these fights that feels a lot like the Zahir versus Korra fight, where it's just, oh look, another fight where Korra just gets beat up for like 5 minutes. And then makes a slight comeback. But this is interesting. Okay, she's unlocked the Avatar state from her previous kind of stage of recovery, and is now in complete control. Kuvira can't stand up to the power of attacks that Korra can put out at this point. The ease at which she can do such big bending, can just use air bending and control so much air like that. She can't win. But we see the return of this vision. That she is still afraid of what happened. They're like, we got the poison out, but they haven't dealt with the core issue, and that is that she is terrified of the fact that she was nearly killed by one of her previous villains, and now here she is in a fight against another one of them. I think there's like a slight sense at this point that I don't think they're linking that theme into it here, the idea that like Korra and Kuvira are similar exactly, but there's a certain kind of aspect to like it happening in that way. Kuvira looking up, and because her hair is sort of kind of out of place, she kind of looks a little bit like Korra. It's standing out. So that's interesting. And yeah, Kuvira gets the sort of personal victory here because someone interfered in the one-on-one fight, and now she has a justification to send the whole army in. But they had to move in at this point. They couldn't allow Korra to be killed here. But very cool defensive maneuver here. Just 2 airbenders just holding everyone back. Because, of course, the ground's been torn up from the fight with a lot of earthbending. It's this dangerous situation of the airbenders are controlling this, like, crazy tornado of air and earth. Here's Huan. And it's just emotion. Pure emotion. And he's like, ugh, Milo. That's nothing but technical prowess. There is no art there, even though it's a pretty great piece. And yeah, I love this astral projection, her signature technique, really good use of it. The fact that at this point, she can use it so easily that she can use it in the middle of a battlefield, basically, in the middle of a hurricane and so on, and it's a good use of just using it under it's one thing to do that like meditating kind of in a perfect situation. It's another thing to do it in the middle of the situation she was in. But yeah, and Bolin's like, wow, you handled that pretty well. Now what's the escape plan? And he's like, no. And he's ready to go out, and that's the thing here. And yeah, Bolin with some quick thinking here. Like, obviously, like, what's going to happen here doesn't make a ton of sense, because they just showed us the way the tracks are. It's 2 metal rails, and then there's metal kind of panels in the middle. So how does Bolin just earthbend them into the ground directly below? As you can see there, it's metal in the middle as well. It's a little bit like, come on, just like Bolin can't metal bend. The Baatar eyes, this is a funny image there. But yeah, you can see it's metal once again, and he just earthbent. I would have understood it if like he had done something like where he created like a lava platform and just like melted their way really suddenly through or something like that. But they just showed him like jumping through the hatch and just earthbending straight down. Just a little bit of like inconsistency. I suppose that's maybe just the background, the difference between like the background art and then the actual like animation stuff that's happening on top of the background. They didn't quite have the consistency between it. And here we go. Pepper, of course. And yeah, I think Milo's going to be such a powerful airbender when he's older. If we ever get to see content with him as when he's older. Yeah, very sad moment for Opal of just having to sort of like in a way abandon some of her family here. And go back and eventually come back for them later with Operation Beifong. But yeah, they have to leave the place. It's a defeat. And yeah, here we go. And you can see like the good ideal of Kuvira very much has been lost here with the idea of like demanding these people to bow before her. It's interesting to have Huan not bow as well, despite him feeling like maybe more one of the weak-willed members of the family. But I love this moment. This is like Baatar Sr.'s best moment. Of just like, oh, just disappointed in him. And they don't really delve into the idea of like, that's Baatar's issue. It's just, he shares the same name as his father. His father's more of the genius engineer, and he's trying to get to that level. And he's sort of constantly like outclassed by his father, then by Varric. This is his moment to prove himself going forward. He can replicate it because he watched him the whole time. What better assistant than Julie? And like this is one of the better things that Book 4 did, is just what they did with Julie. It is really good when you go back to it, and especially with the idea that like currently in the comics, like that's the president at the moment. Like it's pretty cool. So yeah, like I think despite that being on the maybe lower end of the Book 4 episodes, it's still like a good episode. Like the stuff on the train is kind of, it's funny because you have Varric there, but you have Varric in a different kind of emotional state than he usually is. He's a bit more serious. He's got like a serious edge to him in addition to his usual sort of like mad genius sort of persona as well. And then you have kind of Bolin kind of pairs up kind of course well with Varric a lot of the time. And then Baatar, who's such a kind of serious character a lot of the time, he has to be the sort of kind of straight man in the middle of that whole thing. And I think it does work as like that plot point of like Bolin and Varric and them gradually realizing the problem with the Earth Empire and making their way out and back in on the other side of things. It's definitely a pretty cool arc. I think the problems come into play on the sort of like Sue, Kuvira, Korra side of things, because like I said earlier, it's like one of those episodes that it really emphasizes that wow, they did not portray Sue and Kuvira's relationship particularly well on screen. I think this would hit so much harder if you had much more of a sense of showing you that Kuvira was actually a part of the family. That Sue deciding to go after Kuvira would be such an impactful thing if you knew more about how close they are. But because they never show it, it feels like, oh, well, I guess you're meant to view it as more of a Sue just like helped Kuvira out rather than like she was part of the family. But the dynamic that they go for is that she was part of the family. So it makes Sue feel kind of weird that she was willing to go this far and that the brothers were willing to go along with it. And that's just, I think, one of those kind of overall arcs that they kind of forgot about. And it's why I'd be, like I said, I prefer book 1 and 2 to book 3 and 4, because I think book 3 and 4 kind of have more important stuff to the plot that is, I think, missing than the first 2 books do. With book 1 and 2, there are little things you want to know more about. Like, oh, how did Amon meet Hiroshi? Like, with Amon, with Unalaq, how did he join the Red Lotus, meet Vatu, maybe a little bit of his backstory. But for the most part, like, a lot of the core ideas are there. With here, it's kind of like, okay, you told us that she was adopted, and we saw her in the last book being sort of friendly with them. But she's meant to be part of the family, and no one's really treating her that way because it came after this, you know, betrayal, her leaving with Batar Jr. But, like, how did that happen? And there's so many, like, questions. Thankfully, Ruins of the Empire adds a lot of extra context to it, but I still think not enough. And I think within book 4, we should have seen some backstory. I think we should have seen a more conflicted Sue about moments like this. I would have liked to have seen a more conflicted Kuvira over how she dealt with her family in a way. And that would make moments like this, of the Kuvira's glee almost with getting one over on the family after finally taking Zaofu. That'll be such an emotional moment that got across really how far Kuvira has fallen. And I think they just don't quite hit a lot of the, I think, key emotional beats that they need to do here with the idea that they're going for, of like, Kuvira was abandoned by her parents. Her parents gave her away. Sue took her in, but for Kuvira, Sue abandoned her to a degree by abandoning the Earth Kingdom, by choosing not to step in to stabilize things when she was offered that role or opportunity. And that's when Kuvira decided to do what she did. She wouldn't allow other people to be impacted by what's happening. She wanted to step in and make it so that no one else would feel that way in the Earth Kingdom. And the power, obviously, you know, goes to her head. She lets things get out of hand with the way the Earth Empire is kind of run, with the re-education camps and so on, and really lets the whole Great Uniter thing go to her head. I think more of that arc, that fall of the character from book 3 into book 4 needed to be shown. I still think, like, scene to scene, she does stand out with how commanding she is, and her tactics and so on, as we saw with them. Just how cleverly she approached all of this. She made it really clear to not really come across as just she's coming in here to conquer Zaofu, and made it so that, oh, I've only captured these 3 because they tried to assassinate me. I'm only fighting you here because you've come out here to, like, confront me, basically. And so on. Like, they're the kind of points that come across really well with her. I just think a lot of the more cross-season beats needed to be hit that little bit harder. This is why I always point out with, like, book 2, the idea of, like, why family is such an important, like, dynamic across the entire season, in addition to spirituality, because the family dynamic is a key one in terms of keeping track of, like, that other side of Unalaq. He's going so far down the spiritual side of things, he's lost sight of the family side of things. And I feel that's what they're kind of missing a little bit here. We focus very much on the Great Uniter, Conqueror Kuvira, but not who she was before, and so you don't really see much of the transformation. And while the character of Kuvira as a villain is very interesting, the transformation of the character is where the nuance comes from. It's why we care about, like, Amon so much, is because we see that backstory in Skeletons in the Closet. That's why the character, I think, truly stands out, more so than just he can give a good speech. But why does he give that speech in the first place? Like, it's those motivation that's, I think, very important to all of this. And it's just unfortunate that this section of the book is where they probably needed more of that depth, but it's not really there. And I suppose episodes like the next one, Reunion, and then the filler episode, basically in Remembrances, doubly highlight that, unfortunately. But yeah, they're my thoughts on the episode. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.